Today we're going to talk about how to write a summary. Believe it or not, a lot of kids have trouble with this, but it's really easy. Summaries are all about getting the gist of things, pulling out the main ideas, focusing on key details, finding keywords and phrases. It's all about breaking down the larger ideas into a more simplistic form. So today we're going to read a quick article about the Bengal tigers. As we read, we need to highlight important information that is very significant, that if we want to sum everything up, get the gist of the article, we're going to have to include. Let's read. Tragedy in the jungle. Within the lush Melgat rainforest in central India lives a colony of magnificent but endangered beasts, 70 Bengal tigers. They are the last of hundreds that roamed the region less than 100 years ago. The Indian government has passed laws to protect the tigers, but there's a big problem. The laws threaten human lives. The tigers of the Melgat Tiger Reserve share the area with the Korku, a tribe of forest dwellers. To protect the tigers, the government has barred the Korku from using the Melgat. The government wants to move 11 Korku villages out of the reserve. An additional 39 villages, which are on the fringes, will be allowed to remain, but villagers may no longer gather firewood or food or graze cattle in the reserve. For the Korku, the laws are a threat to their very survival. Once nomadic, the Korku were forced to live in settlements in the 19th century when Britain ruled India. They became farmers, but depended on the forest for fruit, nuts, roots, and firewood. It is a difficult way of life. Since 1993, hundreds of Korku children have died because they did not have enough food. Without the reserve's resources, even more would perish. The officials keep talking about saving the tiger. Don't they care about people? Asks Sanja Dandi, a farmer. If we leave the forest, our Korku tradition will vanish. The Korku's plight is reflected across India. At least 8 million people live in or around India's 23 tiger reserves. The reserves are home to 3,000 tigers that have managed to survive illegal hunting and the destruction of their habitat. Now, conservation laws are making it hard for humans and tigers to live together. In January 1997, the government decided to stop forcing villagers to move out of the reserve. It wants them to move voluntarily. Under the Indian Constitution, the government must provide food, shelter, schooling, and medical care for the children of tribal people, a promise not always kept. Conservationists admit they do not know what to do with the villagers. There is so much hunger outside the reserves. Where do we settle them? Asks P.K. Sen, director of Project Tiger, India's program to save tigers. The villagers of the Melgat insist that they are not a threat to the great cats that have been their neighbors for so many years. We have no quarrel with the tiger, says Onkar Shikari, an elderly Korku. We respect one another. This article could easily be in one of your social studies textbooks. So if we're going to summarize this article, the very first thing we need to do is find the main idea. A great place to look for the main idea is in the title. Another great place is in the very first paragraph. Let's look at the very first paragraph again. Within the lush Melgat rainforest in central India lives a colony of magnificent but endangered beasts, 70 Bengal tigers. So we know we're talking about tigers. That's a key word, important information. They are the last of hundreds that roamed the region less than 100 years ago. The Indian government has passed laws to protect the tigers. But there's a big problem. The laws threaten human lives. This is a significant detail, and it is part of the main idea. The main idea of this article is laws made to protect the endangered Bengal tigers in central India are threatening human lives. Remember, the main idea of a story or an article tells what it is mostly about. It's like a one-sentence summary. This sums up in one sentence what it's about. It's the main idea. So if you're writing a paragraph summary, you'll use your main idea as the very first sentence. As we continue throughout the article to find more important details for the summary, we'll highlight those as we go along. We see in the second paragraph that the government wants to move these Korku villages. That's an important detail. Here's another important detail. They may no longer gather firewood or food or graze cattle in the reserve. That's how they survive. This information here is important to a degree, but it's not something that we're definitely going to have to use in the summary. It's really too specific. We don't need super specific details in a summary. We also have expert quotes from officials and also people there on the reserves, a farmer, for instance. We can take what they say into consideration, but typically a summary will not have quotes from experts or people involved in the article. Once again, in this next paragraph, it gives us really specific details. These specific details are important to consider, but you probably wouldn't add them to the summary. Remember, the summary is just pulling out the main ideas. So I probably would not talk about how the reserves are home to 3,000 tigers. Just stating that the tigers live on the reserves is enough for a summary. The next paragraph, though, does have information that I would need to add in my summary. I need to make sure that I point out that in this time, January of 1997, the government decided to stop forcing villagers to move out of the reserve because this is a change from what we had seen earlier. It wants them to move voluntarily. So that's something important that we also need to consider. We also need to take a look at these last two paragraphs and the quotes that these people give us. Where do we settle them? The director states. And then one of the villagers replies, we have no quarrel, we respect one another, stating that they can live together. We should consider that as we think about the last sentence for our summary. So summary writing is all about pulling out main ideas, focusing on key details, but not so much super specific details, and breaking down these larger ideas so that we only write enough to convey the gist of the article. This would be the summary of this article. Now remember, the very first thing I did was I included the main idea. Here's the main idea. Laws made to protect the endangered Bengal tigers in central India are threatening human lives. Your main idea will always be your very first sentence in a summary. Then I go on to break down the larger ideas, and I focus on the key details. The Korku, an Indian tribe, have depended upon the forests where the tigers roam for food, firewood, and grazing lands for their cattle for years. But in order to protect the tigers, the Indian government forced the Korku to leave the tiger reservations. Because of the severe threat to the Korku's survival, however, the government stopped the forced evacuations and now wants them to move voluntarily. The conservation laws to save the tigers are impacting the way these people live. But the Korku believe they can live in peace with the tigers. So, in a summary, we have our main idea as the first sentence. We include all key details, break down the larger ideas, and write only enough to convey the gist of the article. That's how you write a summary.